Welcome to the Sacred Listening Podcast, a sanctuary for those who feel overwhelmed, overscheduled, and overbusy. In this podcast, we explore the various paths of restoring balance in our body from issues such as depletion, anxiety, chronic pain, and stress. We do this by redefining what self-care means on an individual level as we dive into cutting-edge research, personal stories, expert interviews, as well as listening in to the magic and mysticism of our body's wisdom. Join me in reclaiming your health, well-being, and your sense of self. Fertility is an issue that usually doesn't cross a birthing person's mind until they are thinking about getting pregnant or having trouble getting pregnant. But fertility actually starts with a good foundation of healthy tissues and also a healthy connection to one's body and oneself. Even though becoming pregnant is a very natural occurrence, the way we live our lives today is anything but natural. And that can affect the health of our reproductive tissues, our hormonal health, and the levels of toxins within our bodies, just to name a few. Today, I'm speaking with a friend of mine and also someone I look up to, Heather Grzych, on the topic of fertility through an Ayurvedic lens. And if you're not familiar with Ayurveda, it's a sister science of yoga. And even though we will briefly mention what it is in the episode, it really doesn't do justice to this complex system of art and science. Heather Grzych is an American author and expert in traditional Ayurvedic medicine, and she was formerly the head of product development for a multi-billion-dollar health insurance company. She is a board-certified Ayurvedic doctor level in the United States. She is board certified at the Ayurvedic doctor level in the United States, serving on the faculty at Mount Madonna Institute College of Ayurveda and on the board of directors for the National Ayurvedic Medical Association. Heather's first book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, has sold thousands of copies worldwide, and her writing has been featured in Sports Illustrated, Yoga Journal, and the Sunday Independent. Her podcast, Wisdom of the Body, holds an average rating of 5 stars on Apple Podcast. And even though she's an Ayurvedic practitioner, she's currently working on a novel about one man's attempt to control the New World Order. So without further ado, let's welcome Heather and dive into our conversation today. Hi, and welcome to the podcast, Heather. It's so lovely to have you and such an honor to have you share your wisdom about Ayurveda, fertility, and wellness today.
I'm so excited to be here with you, and it's so good to see you.
Likewise. So Heather and I, we met, 8 years ago or something like that. Mm-hmm. And she was on the staff of my yoga therapy training at the Stress Management Center in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we just kind of kept in contact over the years. I've consulted with Heather for some Ayurvedic advices and suggestions. And I've also read her book, The Ayurvedic Guide for Fertility, which I read the first time before I didn't even know if I wanted to have a child, but I read it anyway because I know there's a lot of wisdom and Ayurvedic foundations in there that I could take, even if I don't want to get pregnant. It's just good kind of hormonal foundation for all menstruating people. That's what I found in terms of the content in the book. And then I read it again when I was pregnant, and it was very helpful to review some of the materials in there and to have that as a guide to support me throughout my pregnancy journey. So really thank you for publishing that book, Heather.
Thank you for reading it.
And it's easy to read, actually. You made it very digestible. I know some of the Ayurvedic concepts can be kind of abstract and just hard to grasp because
Yeah.
it's not something we can see or feel. I mean, we can feel a lot of it necessarily, but it's also very subtle. So
Yeah.
made it
I
very digestible.
Well, I think especially yogis really get it because you hear some of the terms, you learn a little bit of Sanskrit, and so if you read about some of these concepts that do have Sanskrit names, because some of them just don't have a good word to correlate in English. There's no way to translate them into English, so
Mhm.
um, the lingo fits for yogis, and it's a very easy transfer into Ayurveda.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, and especially people who have a lot of body awareness, which a lot of yogis have, or meditators, or people who are just into doing something that give dancers perhaps as well, athletes, people who really pay attention to how everything's operating inside them. Yeah.
Have you had non-yogis read your book?
Yeah. I think it kind of goes along with who's into Ayurveda, right? So people have heard of Ayurveda through the pathway of yoga if they're not from India and from the culture. Because in India, Ayurveda is a whole thing. It's, hundreds of thousands of Ayurvedic doctors. It's very different. Whereas we only have a couple thousand here of Ayurvedic practitioners in the United States. In India, it's a part of the major part of their healthcare system. So some people who are from an Indian culture have heard of Ayurveda, or some people who've traveled to India have heard of Ayurveda. Massage therapists, a lot of them have heard of Ayurveda. And people who are into it's becoming more well known now because it's more trendy and a lot of people learning about it from beauty products, herbal medicines, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like what's popular nowadays, I think the turmeric lattes.
Well, that's funny because I am actually drinking a turmeric latte right
And that's
now that I made myself at home.
kind of steeped in Ayurveda, right?
Yeah, yeah. I know. I laugh when I went into Pete's Coffee in San Francisco one day and they had a turmeric latte on their menu. And I was like, wow, Ayurveda's making the rounds.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Kitchery is becoming a like a thing now as well, starting to. I see more and more people learning about it.
Yeah.
Um, and just for those who are not sure what Ayurveda is basically the counterpart to yoga, where as yoga kind of deals with how to manage our mind and psyche and understanding ourselves through the mind. The Ayurveda is body based, physically based, even though there's big part of the mind as well. You can't affect one without affecting and influencing the other, but it very much is looking at your body constitution and how to adjust your lifestyle to your body constitution and also your life stages. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, life stages for sure.
Yeah. So, your book, Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, what inspired it all?
Well, because I couldn't get pregnant when I was in my early 30s. And then I did all this cleansing in my mid 30s and I got a divorce. Okay. Well, I did all this cleansing in my mid 30s. And then right in my late 30s, I get pregnant and have a baby very easily, like on the first try, because well, whatever. I had done a ton of cleansing in the middle. My periods were out of whack in my early 30s. I was an over exerciser. I had tons of inflammation in my body. Um, just, you know, so many things changed, doing all these cleanses in my mid 30s. I had, a couple of tumors and they went away particularly from fasting, which I had written my master's thesis on when I was in Ayurveda school. And I decided, well, if I'm going to write my master's thesis on this, I might as well try it. And all of a sudden, little fatty tumor in my arm went away, and a fibroid, and things like that. So
Wow.
yeah, it was like my body, through the cleansing processes, just changed. And, I want to say it became purified through these processes.
And and then through these processes of you unable to get pregnant in your early 30s, and then happening organically and very very spontaneously
And
in
very
your late
easy.
30s, and very
Yeah.
easily after having gone through the process of fasting and purification, that inspired you to write your experience.
Well, for me, it's interesting. Anybody who's a writer has their own process. Anybody who's listening, if you like to write, you have your own process for that. And at the time, I was just writing. I've always been a writer of something all the time. And I had been writing these little snippets of things for years. And one day I said, what have I been writing about? And I wanted to know if there was a theme. And this was after I had had my son. I was trying to make sense of what I'd been working on over the last couple of years in these works. And I was like, oh, I'm writing about how to get pregnant naturally.
Hmm.
It was very bottom up, like, process for me, where I didn't know what I was doing. And then all of a sudden I said, yeah, I was writing about fertility, natural, how to conceive a child, how to prepare your body for doing that, and how to, purify your body. And so then I was more intentional about it. I was like, I'm going to write this book. And I would walk by the coffee shop, because I have to write in coffee shops and smell coffee. It's like this very Pavlovian thing for me. And so I would walk to the coffee shop, and I would pass this bookstore, and I would always envision my book in the front of that bookstore, walking there all the time. I was like, my book is going to be in that bookstore. And I just kept writing it. And, when you write a book and you get it out in the world, it's such a cool process, because it sparks conversations, much like you having a podcast sparks, cool conversations about things. And the process of writing the book, and like why I wrote the book, is one thing. And then after you write that book, it's like a totally different experience of the things that you learn from other people that want to share with you about their experience, people who've read it. And, I had been working with a lot of clients as well on fertility issues, and I do give, some examples of that in the book. But I learned even so much more after, because so many people wanted to talk about fertility with me after that book got launched. And it happened to launch in the middle of the pandemic, right when we went on lockdown. And so that was cool. Suddenly I was having conversations, being on Zoom with people in Pakistan, or, New Zealand, or South Africa, or Britain, all over the world. All over the world, people are struggling with fertility.
Yeah, it's a pretty big issue, but not talked often enough, I feel like. Or there doesn't seem to be a safe space to talk about it, I feel like. And I have known clients and have clients currently also undergoing a fertility journey of their own. So the fact that the book is the title of the book is so straightforward, like this is for fertility, it does open up the doors and for conversations. And I'm just curious, through writing this book and through working with clients who are on their own fertility journey, have you noticed any trends, themes, patterns amongst these people who are trying to get pregnant and having challenges and difficulty, or maybe even, your own experience, your own fertility journey? What's Perhaps there are some blockages or obstructions physically or mentally or emotionally
Mm-hmm.
that you see in terms of patterns and themes.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that I don't know if it's exactly the same for men, but I really think women all over the world have gotten extremely disconnected from their bodies and from what they really want. Like what they really want, not what their mind tells them they should have or they should do or they should be or what their mind tells them that they want, but what their body actually wants.
Hmm.
And I say that because there's a lot of societal structures and pressures that everybody faces that are not conducive to fertility. And people's bodies are so out of balance. I was just looking up the statistic of obesity, for example. 40% of Americans are obese.
Is it
That,
up to 40 now?
yeah,
Oh my gosh.
okay. And which is really sad. In the Ayurvedic text, it's actually an incurable disease. Now, that was before Ozempic and stuff like that. But even then, those aren't cures, right? You can't cure that. You can just, you know, give something that somebody has to be on the rest of their life to manage the condition. But it's really sad once that happens to people. And, you know, that's just one example. There's a lot of reproductive health issues with people, PCOS and endometriosis. People are just not very healthy right now. You know, definitely in the United States, there's a lot of inflammation, a lot of autoimmune conditions. So, people are not listening to their bodies. They're not treating their bodies well. And that happens for various reasons. Like, I'm not sitting here going like, it's all your fault, people, you know, but it's just very sad that we have this problem for so
Mm-hmm.
many people. And there's a real lack of reverence for the body,
Hmm.
a real lack of understanding of the body. You know, so you have your primary care doctor, you have your psychologist if you're going to therapy, you have your chiropractor if you got a back issue, you have all these different medical providers, and that's very disparate. You might have, you know, 15 minutes with your primary care provider. In the United States, the visits are very short because of the way the system's designed, and it's, you know, it's an expensive system to run. So you're forced with having to integrate all the knowledge that you learn about your body and your mind from all these different people, except you've never had any training on what it means to have a body, how it functions, what this feeling is in your lower left abdominal area. You know, you just don't so the people who have to integrate all this information have never had an orientation to their body. I think it's like, you know how a lot of women say when they finally decide that they're going to focus on their cycles and, you know, pay attention to the moon, and, you know, at some point a lot of women get there and they pay attention to it a lot. And when they start to learn a lot about how that functions, and they feel wronged somehow that this wasn't taught to them when they were young. This comes up, right? You felt that
Yeah,
way?
that was definitely true for me, that at least in my experience, our sex ed was just, this is how sex happens. This is an anatomical part. And when this happens, you get pregnant. But there wasn't anything about how to pay attention or care for our menstrual cycles. And even nowadays, you see commercials for tampons or pads or menstrual products where they like, if you use this product, then you can get through your bleeding phase and still be able to run the marathon or give that big presentation at your company, things like that. So a lot of it does override and ignore the essence of what menstruation is about. And we forget that that's a cycle that we need to pay attention to, even Not just when you want to try to get pregnant, but even starting at the time when you have your first period as a teenager. I think that I think that'd be helpful for a lot of girls and teens who are entering that phase right now to learn about that and have that foundation now so that they won't run into all those disconnect and hormonal imbalances like PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis later on.
Yeah. And it's a real feminist challenge, right? Because on one hand, women want to be able to have the freedom to, if they want to achieve something, let them achieve it, so that they want the freedom to achieve something. And at the same time, their bodies are different than a man's body. Our bodies go through different nuanced cycles throughout the month during the years where they're menstruating. And that's not happening to men. And the world can be a lot more predictable with men because of that. The world with a woman is less predictable. But we live in a world where we want everything predicted. We want to know. We can't, when I grew up, we didn't have cell phones, right? We weren't able to text each other. If you needed to meet someone, you had to make, a plan. And sometimes you just had to leave things up to chance sometimes. You weren't able to just text somebody every 5 minutes.
You kind of have to find them in the crowd.
Yeah. And there was this little bit of serendipity and, you didn't have everything so perfectly organized and controlled the way we have things now, or that we expect them to be. Also, people are very busy now. And when you're busy, you have less room for error, less margin for error, less room for things to go off the plan, because you just don't have the capacity for it. So with women, women were actually left out of a lot of scientific studies up until 2018, where there was a recognition that menstruating women were excluded from a lot of studies. Ovulating women, pregnant women, lactating women, anybody who's not in the follicular phase of their menstrual or luteal phase of their menstrual cycle.
Because they're unpredictable.
Yeah, because things fluctuate. And so if you need to establish a control in a study, it's more difficult to establish a control when you have females involved. Yeah. And so now it just adds because it's, the more dimensionality you add to a study, the harder it is to execute in science, right? So that's changing. I think there are a lot of people doing more research to understand women in as individuals, and also how they may vary from other norms they thought existed in biomedicine. And so we sit here and go, I want to do this, I want to achieve this, but then I got hit with a really heavy period and I really don't want to leave my house. I have very bad cramps, or I'm just tired, my energy is down low, pulling me to the ground, which is normal because that's gravity letting the blood come down. But then we go, no, this isn't right. I should be able to be plucky all the time and energetic and accomplish everything all the time. Yeah. So it's really hard. It's a big challenge for women to find the right spot in there, to be able to achieve what they want to achieve and be strong and all that. And at the same time, honor that something else is happening to them and they may need to respect their body in certain cases in a way they didn't expect.
Right. And our society is not built to support that at all. And I still struggle with that as well. Knowing what I know, it's still I'm pulled in the direction of my work, succeeding in that, achievement, and then also the other side, like how do I honor the slowing down when I need to? Because if I don't, I find that um, if I get disconnected from my body, even worse things happen later on. Yeah. So you mentioned that, well, today fertility is it's very common. It's a common challenge for a lot of women who are trying to get pregnant, and it can also be very expensive in terms of the treatment or and the processes for some people, and very in the medical field. And yet there are a lot of people turning to traditional medicine like Ayurveda to help support their bodies. Why do you think that is? Is
Mm.
it like they kind of exhausted all options, and
Mm.
or do they want to connect with their bodies?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think people go to traditional medicine because they feel dehumanized by modern medicine.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And one reason they feel dehumanized is because they don't get enough time with a healthcare provider to truly understand what's going on with them. And I read that complementary providers spend on average twice as long in a visit with someone than a conventional doctor would. And to understand what's happening with you needs time, because to understand any condition, once you give it a label or a diagnosis, it's only a tiny part of what's actually happening. It's like the surface it's the tip of the iceberg. What you want to understand with complementary medicine or with any medicine, you as an individual, you want to understand what the underlying process is that caused that tip of that iceberg. What is the mechanism? What are the factors that came together to create that, to truly understand it? And I think because complementary providers have more time, and I'll say for myself, studying Ayurvedic medicine, we were taught a lot about disease process. There's a whole 6 stages of disease, and we study that. And so when somebody comes to me with a diagnosis of something, I kind of have to throw it out for a second and be like, well, let me focus instead on, okay, that's cool. Thank you for telling me that. But let's focus on how things are operating so I can understand, what is this dance going on inside you that made that tissue form like that when your body was regenerating? Because your body's always regenerating. You always have cells that are dying. You always have cells that are being born. And so it's a constant state of death and rebirth. And what you do and what happens around you and what your history is influences how those things form. And that kind of leads me to something I should have said earlier about fertility. And another reason that it's such a challenge right now is because of toxins. And that's a tricky word, because toxins, when we think about it, we think about some poison or something, like something in the agricultural system that shouldn't be there, that's poisoning us, or bad air quality, or, arsenic in my water or whatever. That's one, microplastics, right? So toxins are another reason that this is happening, and the amount of toxins in the environment has reached, especially the microplastics. And there's research on that, where a lot of people are really starting to believe that the microplastics are affecting fertility. There's a really great book about that called Countdown by Dr. Shanna Swan. And so those toxins, but other things that can be toxins in our bodies are, if we didn't digest our food well, an endotoxin, which is a toxin that your body creates, not a toxin that you took in from the outside. So any kind of toxin, whether it came from the outside and it was just a toxin to start with, or it was something that didn't process within your body that didn't process well, that made it a toxin, made it harmful to you. Both of those things are what we want to get rid of for people, just for general great health, and that's why in Ayurveda we do a lot of cleansing with people. And now I don't want to laugh at this story because it's not a good story, but I had this friend a couple of years ago send me a message. She was in like one of the areas where the fires were. And she said, "Oh, I'm taking these respiratory support herbs," because she was in this area where there were a lot of fires. And I said, "Well, what's in it?" She's like, "Should I take this? Is this good for me?" And I said, "Well, send me the picture of what's in it, and I'll try to figure out, what herbs are in it and whether I think that's good for you." And I noticed all the herbs were like drying and heating herbs, which you would give to a person when they have a lot of mucus, right? To like dry it out. But she's in a fire area. So why would you want to dry yourself out more when fire is dry and irritating and rough? You'd want to have at that time, in order to protect yourself, more moisture in there, in your lungs and your sinus passages, nasal passages and things like that. So, that idea that if you cleanse something out, then it's all good, but she's still in the area with the fires as well, right? So she's going to take this respiratory support herb where she thinks she's cleansing something out, but I'm like, you're still in the fire. So whatever you do is like, if you kick that out, you're still taking it in. You're still taking it in. You're not escaping. You're not getting rid of the root cause, So I'm saying protect yourself. Don't dry this out. Have something with licorice or something slippery and protecting and moist that can protect your tissues and let you ride this out. So there's a lot of different strategies with cleansing, and it works for, you have to know when people say, "I want to do a cleanse," I'm like, well, what are we cleansing? Where's the issue? So we could think about, okay, we're cleansing your gut, or we're cleansing your liver, or we're cleansing your lymphatic system, or we're cleansing something stuck in your tear duct. It's just, let's get very specific. We're cleansing something out of your uterus. We're let's really look at it. And I think a lot in the wellness world, there's a lot of terms thrown around, but we got to go deeper. We got to understand the specific part of the body that something is happening. Why is it happening?
Yeah, I was just gonna add in that there are a lot of people doing cleanses and fast. There are a lot of like the popular ones, I think, are like juice cleanses, something like that, and I feel like they can't be conducive. You might feel great because we all have things we can shed, but they might not be good for everyone in the long run. And cleanses, like you say, you have to get specific so you know what you need to be cleansed of, and then be able to use herbs or certain foods to help with that process. And same goes with, I feel like, herbs and supplements. People just taking supplements off the shelf, like, well, turmeric is good for me, or ashwagandha is good for me, but is that good under your circumstances and your life stage and where you're living? So that's a very good point that you brought up.
It's super tricky because, herbs, we all have access to herbs in the US. They're not regulated by the FDA. So you can go online, you can buy any of these Ayurvedic herbs. You can buy formulations from India and Sri Lanka and Chinese herbs from Chinese medicine companies. And other herbs from other regions, and a lot grown in the US as well. And you can use them and you can try them. And it's really cool. And you can experiment. If you're very attentive, you can try them, take notes, like just see, sometimes some of them are a lot more potent. I'm really surprised that ashwagandha has made its way into, beverages and Whole Foods and stuff like that, because that's a serious medicinal herb. It raises your testosterone. It's quite heating for the body. People will tell you that it reduces inflammation, but it actually can create a lot of heat in the liver. So a lot of information that is going on in the wellness world about it is not particularly correct. So it's a little bit misunderstood. And also it's you just kind of waste things when you don't know what you really need. It's kind of wasteful. So I wish, like, my dream would be that we're all taught about herbs growing up, and herbal medicines just become part of our standard education. In fact, my best friend, when she was growing up in Russia, she was born in Crimea, and she also lived in Ukraine as well. But when she was living in Russia, they actually had classes on herbal medicines.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, it's cool. And I wish we had that. I wish we had that in school for kids. I wish there was a get to know your body class, and as a yogi, I can imagine you would be really into that too,
Totally. Yeah, I would love to have my daughter be brought up in that environment.
Yeah.
Body-based and connected with the natural world as well.
Yeah.
So, given that this podcast that I'm hosting is about self-care, self-nurture, and obviously I would love to talk more and continue to talk about this, but to wrap it up, what would be one advice you give people of whether they just want to balance their hormones or get connected with their bodies or even support their fertility journey? What's the one thing you feel like would be foundational and essential in that part for their self-care? I know it's a loaded question.
Yeah, it's super hard, right? Because I wish everybody woke up in the morning and meditated. Like, I wish that, or something like that, because not everybody can meditate. But I think what you do in the morning really sets a tone for your day, and also gives you a feeling of being the master of your destiny, even though you're not the complete master of your destiny or mistress of your destiny. You know that there are things you have to surrender to, but it gives you this feeling that you have agency. And if you get to be up around the sunrise, you get to see the beauty of a sunrise, which is, I'm sorry, sunsets are cool, I know, but the sunrises are just, for me, they're just so amazing. They're so amazing. See the sunrise, and there's no way your day will ever go bad, no matter what happens to you in your day. And just doing that, and before you go into the fray of the day, into the chaos, can set you up to have more self-awareness. You're intentional sitting or standing or whatever physical posture you're in for a short period of time where you're quiet and observing and grateful and excited and appreciative of your body and everything that you have in your life. And it doesn't have to take a long time. It'd be amazing if it took 30 minutes, but who's got that? That's what I wish. It's not necessarily a in Ayurveda, we do deal with a lot of Ayurvedic herbs, dietary changes for your body type, for your health condition, for your life stage, like you said earlier. Different types of body treatments, you know. A lot of Ayurvedic people will recommend you do body oiling, right? But that's actually not good for everybody. It's good for a lot of people, but it's not good for everybody. So I think if I was going to pick one thing for everyone, it would be getting up in the morning and watching the sunrise or meditating.
I love that. That's so beautiful. Just got like chills and shivers thinking about that. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for being here today with us, Heather. And where can people find you? I know you have another book also in the works, and you have a podcast. So share a little bit about that. I'll also put the details in the summary as well.
Cool. Well, I have a very strange last name. So my first name is Heather. My last name is Grzych. So if you go to heathergrzych.com, you can check me out there. I do some blog posts, and you can learn about my podcast there, and or find me on Instagram at Heather Grzych. I do post a little bit on Instagram. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Heather. It was lovely chatting with you today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you.
I am so glad that I read Heather's book even prior to wanting a child, so that my hormonal health and reproductive system can be on track if I ever decide to have a child, which obviously I did later, birth a tiny human recently. Even if I ended up not wanting a child, I can be rest assured that my body is humming along healthily. So while yes, our bodies are made to create and birth humans, we live in a world that have put up so many obstacles to that. Think environmental toxins, excessive amounts of stress, foods with low nutritive value. We need to clear these potential obstacles for more easeful fertility. You can check out Heather's book, The Ayurvedic Guide to Fertility, on her website, heathergrzych.com, HeatherGrzych.com, where you can actually read the first 6 pages for free. You can also find her on Instagram at Heather Grzych. So until next time, dear listeners, you can listen in and connect with your body's wisdom and what it is telling you to cultivate healthy feminine flow, whether or not you intend to get pregnant, or even if you're past the childbearing age. We can all use healthy hormonal cycle and a healthy body. Thank you so much for listening and joining me in this revolution to redefine self-care today. If you enjoyed this show, please leave a review, rate, and subscribe. To connect with me, you can find me on ElaineYoga.com, on Instagram at Elaine_yoga therapy, or join my email newsletter at ElaineYoga.com/email.